We good to go?
We are indeed.
All right. Well, Han, thank you so much for meeting us. Right now we're doing this program called the Houston Asian American Archives, and it aims to profile first-generation immigrants who have moved to the United States from Asian countries. And basically, we want to talk about experiences, how you've grown up in the U.S., what your experiences have been like since you were young. So I guess the first question we'd probably want to ask you is, what got your family to move to the United States in the 80s, from what we understand?
So the country fell in 1975. I was born in 76. And at the time, Vietnam was very poor. And they didn't see any hope for a future there. So they tried to escape a couple times and finally succeeded in 79. So.
And how did your family escape? Because we've studied, different families coming by plane, by ship, by boat. What's the story?
So we were very much the boat people. So
okay.
75 they tried to leave once with a group of folks, but that didn't work. And then in about 77, 78 they tried to leave. 78 they tried to leave again by boat, but were caught. And then 79 we left separately. So myself and my dad, and then a few months later, my mom and my sister left.
And do you have any recollections of the journey here at all?
Only very small fragments. I remember being the boat eventually landed and got to an island, and it was a rocky out in the sea. It was pretty rocky, and so the captain had driven the boat into the rocks, and so it started to sink.
Wow.
So my dad threw me over the boat to my uncle, who was already in the water. So I remember that, and I vaguely remember pirates coming aboard the boat, but that's about it. Yeah.
Fantastic. And so you got to the United States in 1980, is that
about 79, probably 80.
Okay.
79, 80.
And you landed in Seattle, Washington.
Seattle.
And what was the journey like to get to Texas? You came to Texas after that?
We did. So Seattle, we went to Seattle because that's where our sponsor was.
Okay.
So it was a church sponsored our family. And we were in Seattle for about a year and a half, 2 years. My dad, so when you're a refugee, you're allowed so many months of welfare, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so when that ran out, he had to go find a real permanent job. So left school. He had some friends in Houston. We drove from Seattle to Houston in a Mustang with no air conditioning. That actually eventually broke down.
Wow. And I guess then your formative years growing up, you grew up technically as an American then, because you must have come to Houston when you were 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah, when I was in Houston, I was 6 years old. So.
And that was a very conservative time when Texas was it's still not very liberal, but perhaps it's less liberal during the time you came here. So what is it like coming from a completely different land as, a child and, assimilating into the culture of Texas and the United States?
When you're that young, you don't notice that you're different. So that's one thing. And then the things that... So the first thing is you don't really notice that you're different. So I'll give you an example. I saw my first movie when I was in Seattle. I probably didn't go see another movie until I was at least 12 or 13. But it never dawned on me that was somehow different. Well, the first movie was James Bond. So I remember that. Or I'll give you another example. Is that like when you're an immigrant, things like after-school sports are unknown to the parents, so you're not encouraged to do those things. So it never occurred to me that maybe I wanted to, or maybe I didn't. Right? Or the fact that you speak a different language in the house is not. It wasn't different. You didn't think of it as different because that's just the way it was.
So it was like normal life for you to be kind of Vietnamese, very culturally Vietnamese at home and culturally very American outside of the house.
Right.
Okay.
Was there ever a point when you realized that like other kids in your class spoke, like was there like a point where it was like you realized that there was?
Yeah, probably right before high school, or maybe during high school, it became very obvious that it was different. like expectations are different, right? So some of the folks I went to high school with, the expectation was, hopefully they'll graduate in high school, and if they're lucky, they'll go to college. And that was not the expectation in the house. The expectation in the house is, what graduate degree are you going to get?
Right? Yeah, I can completely identify with that, being from an Indian family myself.
Right.
And so you went to college and you studied international relations. Do you study international relations because you're interested in it, or was it because you wanted to kind of understand the world in general?
Well, so I was a biology major as well. So I majored in biology because I had thought that I agreed with my parents that I wanted to be a doctor. It turns out I was wrong. So I majored in biology, but always knew I wanted to do something more macro. Where, if you think about, medicine is very micro in a sense, right? One-on-one interactions, one person at a time. Whereas my interests have always been macro. So I thought international relations was a good way to look at that. And I thought it'd be fun, so I majored in international relations.
And then from then you went to law school.
Yep.
So that's another shift. You did medicine in your biology degree, politics in your international relations degree, and then law school for your law degree. So that must have been like a very interesting time for you as well, no?
Well, I went to law school to hide out because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And here's the problem, being Asian. When I went home to tell my parents, I'm not going to medical school, you can't say I'm not going to medical school. You have to say, instead I'm going to, and you pick something, right? And the only thing I had done that would get me into graduate school was I had taken the LSAT, not because I thought I was going to law school, but because my roommate and I were trying to figure out who was a better test taker. So I had the LSAT in my back pocket. So I told my dad that I was going to law school.
And was that accepted at home as a career path for a Vietnamese kid to say, oh, I'm not going to medical school, but I'm changing completely my focus to law?
Well, they were clearly disappointed because when I went to USC, I had gotten into a program called Baccalaureate MD. So you're admitted to both the undergraduate and graduate school at the same time. And so in their head, it was guaranteed that I was going to medical school. And so, to say that you're not is going to be a disappointment.
Yeah, Amir is...
I've got my voice thing on.
Good. Yeah,
See, I've still got it on. I was just losing my train of thought. Okay, so then you finished law school, and you got a law degree now. And from then I saw from your bio that you got involved with so many different societies. You're involved in the Asian Society, Young Professionals Asia Society as an entity. You're in leadership positions. What made you want to join a society like the Asia Society that acts as a bridge between the West and the East? Is that is it something cultural that you wanted to get involved in because of your heritage?
No. So after law school, I went to Lufkin, Texas to work at a law firm. And I got engaged with my wife, and the deal was wherever we both wound up, we would go or live there because we were living in different cities at the time. So we both wound up in Houston, and so I came back to Houston. When I came back to Houston, I knew I wanted to get involved, and my interest in Houston has always been about making it a better place to live.
Right.
And at the time, Asia Society had said that they were going to build this new building in the museum district called the Asia House at the time. And they had some renderings up. And so I called and asked, well, this is pretty neat. How do you get involved? So that was really how I got involved in the Asia Society. But I got lucky in a sense because it also happened to be an Asian-focused non-profit. So I got involved more in the worldwide Asian community. Actually, more in the worldwide Asian community than the local, in fact.
And do you think that a lot of people who join an entity like the Asia Society, do you feel that they have a similar focus to you, or do you feel that they're placing themselves in different spaces in the spectrum of being an Asian in Houston or an Asian immigrant in Houston?
I think Asia Society is unique in that it's not necessarily an Asian cultural organization. I think of it more as a Asia gateway organization, meaning, again, it's that micro versus macro, right? So it looks more outwards at the rest of Asia than inwards at Asian American as something to concentrate on.
And I know that you've gotten involved, and I think we've met at several Vietnamese association functions. Like there was a party at Versace, and we met there for a non-profit for refugees as well. Have you found yourself getting more involved in the Vietnamese organizations? Because it's an interesting concept that you have so many individual ethnic enclaves. You know, the Indians have the Network of Indian Professionals, the Vietnamese have their own associations, and these are all kind of popping up all over the place. As somebody from Vietnamese descent, what do you think about these organizations, and do you find yourself having been participating more in them?
No, I don't. I try to get involved in those kinds of associations, but it's a little bit difficult for me because well, two things. One is that my Vietnamese isn't as good as it probably should be, and two, the things that they do don't really interest me. Right? I mean, what's an example? So there's some groups that are doing great work with various things. So, for example, there's an organization called the Hope Initiative, and basically it's helping orphanages in Vietnam, and that's great work. But there's a lot that goes into that, and I'm not very good at the things that they need to do, people to do, to make that work very well. Or there's another organization that helps. There are Vietnamese boat people now who are still refugees in places like Hong Kong and various other places. So they do a lot of work to help those refugees. Again, my skills don't match what they need. So it's hard for me to get involved in those organizations, other than to provide financial support, moral support, go to their events and that kind of thing. But to actually be involved and be inside helping is not something I'm very good at.
Mm-hmm. Now, again, I'm going to go back to these idea of these ethnic communities. It's interesting because within the communities, there's definitely a hierarchy. You have people who are very popular and can appeal to people within their communities. But why do you feel like in the spaces of sports, in terms of politics, we don't see Asian Americans represented as they should be? Because you see a lot of them going into medicine, into law, and they're doing great. But we see very few people like Jeremy Lin. We see very few people like Gary Locke, who have really gotten mainstream appeal. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because, well, if I had to guess, I would guess that the history of a lot of Asian immigrants are refugees of one sort or another, right? And I think it's a very similar problem to some Hispanic groups, in that when you're a refugee, of economic refugee or political refugee or some sort of refugee, it implies that you had to overcome devastating economic hardship, right? And so your ability to take risks is much reduced because it's more important to have a safe economic future than it is to take a risk on a political future, or take a risk and try to get into the NBA, or take a risk and do these low percentage success kind of things.
But do you think that's it's kind of like a psychological thing? Because when Obama got elected as president, he came from a nothing background. He never had any money or any support, but he was able to get mainstream appeal and be one of the first African American man to get to the presidency, and he got that appeal. He got young people involved of all sorts of ethnicities. What steps do you think that Asian American immigrants and communities in places like the United States can do if they want to be able to get fully accepted and get that mainstream appeal?
I think that Asian Americans can get that mainstream appeal if they want to. I don't think there's anything unique or special we have to do. Mm-hmm. I think it's just a matter of how many people want to. Right? I mean, in Houston, for example, you have Gordon Kwan, who was city council member. You now have another city councilman, I can't remember his name, but a Vietnamese man. And I don't think that their pathway to political success was much different than anybody else. I think you just don't see as many, not because we're not successful, because there aren't as many that want to do it. And I think that's slowly changing with people that have been here for a very long time, 3-4 decades kind of thing, or families that have been here for 3-4 decades.
Okay.
Kind of thing.
If I could just move back to the personal, and I'm hoping that this is not too personal, but I met your wife. She's a lovely lady, but she's Indian. That's very interesting for me and
Right.
for our class, because let me see a Vietnamese-Indian union, which I've personally never seen before. But you guys very much in love, very happy together. What was it like telling your parents, for example, that, Mom, Dad, I'm engaged to an Indian lady, or I want to marry an Indian lady? What is that like?
So that was interesting. But it was interesting. My first girlfriend was Indian. And my last girlfriend, my wife, is Indian. In between, there were no Indians. So in between, I dated one Vietnamese person, a lot of Caucasian women, and I think my parents are more progressive than most other Vietnamese families. So I was very lucky in that sense. But they did have concerns about cultures clashing, because there are differences between the Vietnamese culture and the Indian culture. I was raised Catholic, and with a Buddhist tradition, right? Because Vietnam is originally a Buddhist country, whereas my wife is very much Hindu. So there was concerns about that for sure, but it wasn't an objection. It was a concern, and I think anybody can understand that concern. I think it would be like if an American married a Hungarian or Czechoslovakian woman. Maybe the skin color is the same, but culturally the difference could be so big that it might not work. And I think that's the same concern my parents had.
Okay.
I'm curious, how did her parents feel about it?
Her parents are fine. I think her parents are very progressive. So I told you they're Hindu, right? But they both eat meat, so.
Fantastic. Let's time check. 17 minutes.
We're supposed to go for 1 to 2 hours.
What? Are you joking?
No. Did you?
Are you serious?
Yeah.
You're not joking right now.
No.
This is real life.
I'm dead serious. Absolutely dead serious.
Okay. I've run out of my 5 questions.
Alright. So, you mentioned that your Vietnamese wasn't as good as it should be, but you said that you spoke Vietnamese at home when you were growing up. So, how did that happen?
My parents couldn't speak English, so there was no choice. So,
you spoke it at home when you were growing up, but now you don't speak it as much.
So I went to undergrad in '93, and I didn't get back to Houston until 2003. So I had a decade where I only spoke English.
Actually, I had a very interesting question, and this is something I actually wanted to know. No, I remember this now. Your parents came, so you came with your father and uncle, drove to Houston, and your mom and your sister joined you later.
So 79. So we're boat people, right? We're out at sea for I can't remember how many weeks or days, 10 days or 16 days or something like that. Ran out of water, ran out of fuel, crashed the boat into the island. Wound up on the island, this Malaysian island, and the reason why the captain crashed the boat is because the Malaysian Navy didn't want us landing. There were lots of boats at the time, and nobody wanted to take in Vietnamese refugees. And so the Malaysian Navy was saying, go away. And on the island itself was an AP or Reuters reporter or something taking photos. So we knew they couldn't shoot us if we crashed the boat. So the captain crashed the boat. Wound up on the island. The Red Cross eventually came around, and we were on that island for 6 months.
Right.
During that 6 months, my dad knew my mother was going to take a different boat with my sister. And sort of the idea was, they knew that boat people or refugees that came that way had a 50-50 chance of surviving. So they split the family in two so that part of it would survive.
And when your parents came to Houston, I want to focus on them because they're very interesting to the study, I think, as first-generation immigrants. How did they get back on their feet again? Like, what were they doing in Vietnam prior to you guys leaving in terms of their occupation and their jobs? And what were they doing in Houston when they came here fresh,
Right.
as immigrants? What is the difference?
So my dad was so South Vietnam. Basically, if you didn't do well in school, you went to the Army or Navy or Air Force, or you went to the military because there was a war going on. So percentage-wise, there were very, very few people who went to college or even finished high school in Vietnam at the time. My dad, though, had become a lawyer, so he had done very, very well. They lived a very, very, my dad at least, lived a very, very good life. He had scooters before there were scooters in Vietnam. He had 2 houses, he had his staff, things like that. And that was before the fall of Saigon. Afterwards, he got lucky because on my mother's side, her father, my grandfather, had done some things, and eventually they were there was somebody in the North Vietnamese government that protected the family. So for a few years after the fall of Saigon, the family did okay, but then my parents tried to leave, and at that point my dad was put in re-education camp, and my mom my grandmother bribed my mother out of jail, my mother and myself, and my uncles out of jail. And when we were bribed out of jails, we have no paperwork, so you can't live inside the city. So they lived out in the farms to hide from the government.
And your dad's experiences in the re-education camp, what was that like? Was it a violent camp or was it a political camp? What was it like?
It's a jail essentially, or forced labor in my dad's case. So he describes it as they were in North Vietnam, they were in Hanoi. I think Hanoi. Actually, I don't remember where. And they went out to this boggy marsh kind of area, chained together, and gave him a shovel and said, "Okay, start digging. We're going to build an island in the middle of this lake." So that was, people around him died because of disease, and eventually he got sick too, like just sick. But when you're just ill like that, they don't let you rest. And so people were dying because they had a cold or whatever, and it turned into pneumonia, and then you would die. So you'd have to be physically injured where you couldn't do the work. So he stuck his foot into a sharp wooden edge so that his foot would be bleeding, and he would go to the infirmary where he could really rest up and get over his sickness. So that was probably, he said, the hardest part.
And
How long was he?
I think about 6-9 months or a year. I can't remember.
Wow.
Quite a while.
And during that time, you didn't get to see him very much, I suppose,
No.
at all.
No.
And how was your mom coping with everything, like raising you and your sister and having to deal with, the whole political situation? How was your mom seems to have probably been like a rock in your life in that case.
Well, yeah. So my mom had me and my sister, and my uncle, also my dad's brother, was helping my mom as well. So we all lived out in the farm area while he was in jail.
And how are you guys making your living out there? Just doing agricultural work, or?
Yeah, and I suspect, I've never known, but I suspect living off savings from my grandmother,
Okay.
on my dad's side.
And I suppose it's like a community with many different families who are in similar situations, right?
No, because at the time you don't really want to bring attention to yourself, so you get to know nobody.
To be as nondescript as possible in that case. And then when they came to Houston, how did they pick up again? How did you get to where you are, and how do your parents support you through school, through college, and stuff like that?
So when my dad first landed in America, as I said, there was some government assistance available, so he went to school. to get a degree. I think he eventually got an AA degree. But as soon as that ran out, they moved to Houston. His first job was selling insurance door to door in the 35th Ward. So he would literally go door to door to these very, very impoverished areas and sell basically funeral policies, right? Because these families need insurance policies so they could pay for the funerals. So they would pay these funeral policies, and the way these things worked is you would go to door every week and pick up cash, so that those are the premiums. And so it's pretty dangerous. So he was mugged several times, that kind of thing. So he did that for a couple of years. At that time, my mom cleaned hotel rooms for a few years. And eventually my dad found a job, I think in 1984, with Exxon doing data entry for Exxon. And my mom, a couple years later, also found a job with Exxon. So before my mom found a job at Exxon, she did house cleaning. She worked at Mervyn's, loading, unloading. My dad sold insurance. He, worked the docks at various places to move equipment for electronics resellers.
So kind of whatever he could get,
whatever he tried to do. Right. And so my dad eventually got a data entry job at Exxon, and my mom, at the time, the computers relied on tape drives, like large tape drives. And so her job was to move those tape drives from one place to another and store them and put them on the computers and things like that. So they did that for several years before they both started getting promotions and things like that. And so I think eventually my dad became a data analyst for Exxon. And my mom, my mom quit. So when I went to college, they realized they couldn't afford both me and my sister in college. And so my mom quit her job and they bought a grocery store so that they could get more income. And they owned a grocery store for about 6 years, 7 years.
And where was that grocery store located?
North Houston.
Okay.
And so during the grocery store years, as I call it, they'd work from 8 till 10 every day, 6 days a week. So.
And who are their main clientele? Was it mainly Asian Americans, or was it
Hispanic?
everybody?
Almost 80% Hispanic.
You've spoken a lot about Hispanics and their involvement in your life. Do you see a lot of connection between the Asian American community and the Hispanic community in Houston?
I think so. I think every immigrant culture, in a sense, when they come to America, whether it was Italians in the early part of the century, or the Vietnamese recently, or the Hispanics even now, I think it's very, very similar across. The experience is very similar across all those immigrant cultures. Because they all start off. There's one culture that's different, and I could talk about that a little bit later. But they all start off very, very poor. It's the consistent thing, and so they start off poor, but they also start off having taken a risk to come here. So I think just by that alone, you have people who are going to be a little bit of risk takers and going to be hard workers, because to get here, you can't just coast.
And your parents, I'm going to go back to your parents again because I think they have a really interesting story. But I know you said that you never really experienced any discrimination or anything growing up in the United States. But perhaps your parents' story is a bit different because they came to the United States in a time where Asian Americans were not given the same kind of recognition that they have today. Did they experience anything in terms of difficulty in assimilating and socializing and acclimatizing to the culture here?
Well, like every other immigrant population, I think I've experienced discrimination, they've experienced discrimination. It's how I can't speak for others, but I know the Vietnamese population reacts to it, that I think is slightly different than maybe others. We generally ignore it, the discrimination. But let me give you an example. I was talking to a college, when I was in high school, talking to a college admissions officer to a very prestigious school. I won't say which one.
Okay.
But a very prestigious school. The admissions officer, now this is the admissions officer, right, told me explicitly, you're Asian, you must have higher scores and do more than any other race to get into my school because we have too many Asians already. Okay? So, right at the time I heard that, I thought that makes sense to me, right? So I think the way we react to it is slightly different. Applying for law firm jobs, right? Once you get to the interview stage at a law firm, you overcome their first hurdle, which is grades and your test scores. Okay. After that hurdle, I mean, no client will ask, so what were your grades in law school?
Yeah.
So that doesn't matter. What does matter is what kind of person are you? Do you seem like you're trustworthy? Things like that. And being Asian is a barrier to that.
Why is that so?
Well, because culturally, think about us culturally. Culturally, we're withdrawn a little bit. We're reticent to speak, right? And so, as a lawyer, if you're going to be a rainmaker and bring in clients, that's going to be a serious impediment. It goes back to that thing you asked about politicians. Why aren't there more Asian politicians? Well, because we're not out there. We're not necessarily going to be in the spotlight, right? And as a successful lawyer, part of what you need to do is just that, right? I mean, it's no accident that lawyers become politicians, right? So the same skills that make you a successful politician also can make you a good lawyer. And as an Asian, you're not necessarily going to have that. And how you talk to people is also going to differ. Let me give you an example. When I first applied to law school, everybody was an elder. And so you have to provide respect to everybody. And so the way you speak to them is not as an equal, right? But is as a
Subservient kind
of person. When I got to law school, I realized my peers are not doing that. They're talking to their interviewers as if they're peers, right? And that was a definite change in context for me. So I had to change the way I interviewed in order to get the jobs. So it's a significant thing.
So you said you had to change kind of like how you adapted to interviews and stuff. So do you find that you've had to kind of separate the Asian part of you from the American part of you throughout your life?
Absolutely. So when I got into college, I took the I can't remember what the test is called, where they figure out whether you're an introvert or extrovert.
Okay.
What test is that? I can't remember. Anyway.
Personality test.
Yeah, the personality test. I was an introvert. Okay? When I exited law school, I took the same test, and I was an extrovert. And it was a conscious decision because I knew after meeting everybody in law school that I would not succeed as a lawyer being the way I was.
And you said the Vietnamese culture makes you kind of very much introverted.
Yes, I mean, you see it even in the way you say hello, right? So my friends' kids, when they come by, will say hi, come by, wave hi, and run out and play, right? When I visited my parents' friends, they told us to go straight up to the adult, bow, say hello, stand there for a little while, and then go. So just from the way you said hello, it's different.
And did people ever judge you for that, in the broader context of society, for your Vietnamese values?
No, I think America is very welcoming about that. I think people are very okay with differences.
Okay, so by and large, you feel like your family is definitely accepted in America.
Yes.
And in terms of... Sorry, do you have a question?
No, I was just going to... you mentioned with the law school and the college admissions officer having experienced discrimination in that way. Were there...
But I wouldn't call it discrimination.
Well...
Differences.
Yeah.
Right?
Were there any instances of, overt discrimination where people acting negatively towards you because you were Vietnamese when you were like growing up in school?
Well, I went to A-Leaf, which is predominantly minorities, so that helped, I think. At USC, going to fraternity parties was definitely difficult.
Is that stereotype that frat boys are very much white Caucasian males and?
It depends upon the fraternity, for sure. But yeah, some of the fraternities. I'll give you an example. Some of the actually all the fraternity parties that were available, you'd have to get your name on a list, right? And there are some fraternities that clearly didn't want my name on that list.
So do you feel like there are institutions built into the system that kind of have that glass ceiling effect almost, like in terms of the fraternities, in terms of the things you talked about in education, in terms of law? Do you feel that the United States still has these systems that kind of prevent you as an Asian American from, reaching your full potential or doing the things you want to do?
I'd phrase it differently. I would say that there's a glass ceiling because there are cultural norms that, in general, Americans, successful people have that are not necessarily cultural norms within certain cultures, right? And we talked about one of them where you talk to someone always as a peer,
yeah,
right? And that's not something that the Asian population does very well, right? So here's a good example. When I joined the law firm, I spoke with the partners at the law firm as if they were peers. I would go to eat lunch with them and work with them as a peer. When I went to my second company, I did the same thing with the vice president, the president level, and I thought nothing of it, right? But people who joined the company later on ask, why is it that you get to have lunch with these people and I don't? And the difference is not because I'm Asian, but the difference is because I asked. Because that trait, to treat your superiors as equals, is what they view as successful, right? And people, whether they're Asian or not, that don't do that, are not going to be quite as successful engaging like that. And the Asian culture doesn't encourage that as much as others do.
And I know you've got a company now, and I know you guys do travel a lot to Asia for business. So first, if you could just tell us a little bit about the company that you have and what you guys do, and then we'll talk about how you guys go to Asia and your experiences out there as a professional now.
So the company is a software company, supply chain software. Has about 4,000 customers around the world. About 90% of them are here in the U.S., but about 10% in Asia. We have offices in Hong Kong, Shenzhen, and a salesperson in Shanghai. And we have a development shop in Vietnam.
Were you located?
We're good, thank you. Yeah, we're fine, thank you.
Leave it or?
You can take it if you like.
Oh, okay.
I'm still working.
Okay, take your time.
Thank you.
So we have about 150, 160 people in Vietnam doing software development for us. But our headquarters and the bulk of what we do is in the U.S.
Okay. And interestingly, you've now kind of come full circle. No, you came in as a child to the United States as an immigrant.
Right.
What's it like going back to Asia as a professional, as a man who's made it on your own?
You can never go home again. I am less Vietnamese than I am American. What I mean by that is that I know that there are cultural differences between me and other Americans who grew up here. But those differences are much narrower than me and other Vietnamese people. And I think if you talk to any immigrant who came here in their childhood, I think they'll say the same thing. The world views are different, and it's hard to bridge that gap. Now that when you grow up hearing and learning to believe in things like democracy and capitalism and the power of the individual, right? The importance of the individual, and then you go to another culture where you know, where it's family first, society second, yourself third. It's very different, right?
So that ideology is different. So then that's interesting. So now you go back to Vietnam, because I know you go there for business and for your work. What are people's perceptions of you there? Like, looking at it from the outside, like you know, you're culturally Vietnamese, you perhaps look like a lot of people there, but I'm sure a lot of people must see you as being distinctly different as well, and they can pick that up probably as well, no?
Oh, absolutely. They you know, there's a we're called Viet Kieu. It's just, you know, and we're very very clearly different. There's no doubt about it. The native Vietnamese recognize foreign raised Vietnamese in an instant. Right? It used to be because of our size. We used to be just physically larger. But no, we also dress differently and talk differently and all that.
And has there been any experiences there that you could share that kind of make you feel a bit?
Oh, so I was going on this boat ride into towards this island, and the lady who was paddling the boat actually was talking to somebody and didn't realize I was Vietnamese, and she was saying that you know, it was odd to see a Korean guy with an Indian wife.
That's not quite. But is there then a desire to ever return home? Do you ever feel like, you know, I know you said that you can never go home, but is there a desire to go home? Because there's a difference there, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a desire to belong, right? Where whoever you are, there's a desire to belong. Sometimes that means moving back to Idaho. Sometimes that means moving back to Ho Chi Minh City or whatever. There's a desire to belong, and so some things, like for example, eating in Vietnam is much more comfortable for me than eating in America.
Wow.
Right? Because I grew up eating Vietnamese food day in, day out.
Yeah.
Right? And so even today, you know, when I wake up, I'm really groggy in the morning, and my wife asks me, what do you want to eat? The first thing that pops up in my mind is like a bowl of pho or some variation of that. Right? But I don't say that, because when I say pho, there are only like 3 restaurants in all of Houston that I would go to eat that. Whereas in Vietnam, you know, every other corner there might be something really good. Right? So things like that. The fact that looks are another thing, right? The Western conception of beauty is what I grew up with, right? Because I grew up here, and I don't fit it, right? And I know that. But in Vietnam, it's much less clear to me whether I look good or bad, because I look like everybody else, right?
That's also quite interesting, because our understanding of America is it's a very multicultural place, a place where everybody can fit in.
Yes.
But in some ways you still can't, no matter how hard you try.
Absolutely. You know, there's a movie about, many years ago, there was a Mexican-American singer named Selena. Right? And there's a movie made about her, and there's a line where her father tells her, you've got to be more Mexican than Mexican and more American than American because you're both. Right?
Yeah.
And to an extent, I think that's absolutely true of immigrants, is that you've got to be more American than American, because if you're, to the extent that you're not, those differences are amplified by the way you look.
And going back to one of our previous conversations, you said that there was a cultural minority group that was different in Houston than the Vietnamese and other groups. Which group is this and why?
The Indian population.
In what way are they different?
Because the Indian population came here generally to get graduate degrees, right? Like literally they would come for their master's or PhD and whatever. Or they came here already as physicians. So they entered the U.S. as professionals, which is very different than most other immigrant populations.
And then with that, do you think that there's a social hierarchy that kind of comes up between Asian cultures and Asian immigrants to the United States?
I don't think there's a social hierarchy. I think there's clearly differences. Like I would say that there were even fewer Indian politicians than Vietnamese or Chinese American by population, right? And a function of that is that you think about it, if you come over as a professional class, why would you want to expose yourself to the vagaries of, politics?
And in terms of, sorry, you've been having your mouth open.
It's okay.
No, go for it. After you, please.
It was a totally different topic.
Go for it. No, go for it. I was going to switch the topic, so it's after you.
Okay. I was wondering, going back a bit, during the grocery store years, as you said, was that when you were in college?
Yes.
So, were you helping your parents with the grocery store at all, or were you in a different city?
No, I was in a different city, so I wasn't. I didn't help at all. Actually, it was an incredible move by them because what my dad basically said. I mean, I think this tells you why he was able to get on a boat and try to leave. Right? He looked at the situation and said, "Okay, I can't afford for both Han and Judy, my sister, to be in college. I just can't do it. But I need to be able to let them choose wherever they go to school. Okay, so I need to do something else." So he goes and looks for a grocery store to buy. He wanted to buy a small one at first, but then realized that there wasn't enough money, essentially, for the smaller ones. So he bought a full-blown grocery store with butcher market and everything else, and had my mom quit. And so she would work during the day, all day, and he would work at Exxon still because they needed insurance and the safety net. And then after work, he would drive straight to the grocery store and work from the end of his Exxon shift to about 9 to 10 at night every day.
Wow. And I think we have another 10 minutes, so I just want... Sorry? Well...
1 to 2 hours.
Tranquilo. I wanted to talk about identity. How do you identify yourself then on a spectrum? Where do you see yourself fitting in society? And what are your aspirations for developing, the Asian American model idea in the future?
I would say this differently. I identify myself as very clearly American. I think that the next century, Asia as a continent and the individual countries within Asia will be extremely important. So, as an American, to further the American prosperity, I think it's important that it turn from Europe to Asia and engage in Asia more directly and more directly, so that it can understand how to engage and in some instances when it has to win. And I think that's very, very important. So I think that's why I like Asia Society so much, because it is just that, right? It's an organization that can turn the U.S. attention from Europe to Asia.
And how do you think, what would you like to see Asia Society do a bit more in terms of your idea of kind of bridging that gap and kind of spreading the Asian culture to as many people as possible, also including as many people from different races as possible? What steps would you yourself take?
I think they're actually doing a fantastic job. I don't, more of what they're doing would be good. The real trouble is that, there aren't a lot of Asian Americans in Paducah. And so to say to America, hey, all your ancestors came from Europe, but why don't you turn your attention to Asia instead, is a very difficult thing. So, you have New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Houston, and other large cities with large Asian populations where that's happening, where businesses are considering going to Asia and things like that. And it's more unusual in say, the Midwest to do that.
And you've traveled, I know, extensively in the United States itself. Do you see a difference in how Asian Americans are kind of assimilated and socialized here versus in other cities in the U.S.?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is really important. The Asian Americans, my cousins in California, who grew up with a lot of other Vietnamese Americans, still have an accent.
Oh.
Right? I don't think I have an accent. I have a higher tone than most Americans would, but I don't think I have a strong accent. So that's just one of the outward differences. But there are even larger differences in terms of culture. right? The way they look at the world is a bit different than the way I look at the world. They see the world as a struggle, and their safety net is within the Asian American community, right? I see this whole country as an opportunity, right? And where I eat and my family is my safety net.
Do you think then the concept of the American dream is still something that Asian Americans across the United States can still aspire to? Is it a real dream for the Asian American in the United States?
I think it's just as real for other cultures as it is for the Asian American culture. I think what's slightly different is that a big component of the Asian American dream is an education component, right? So for example, there's a larger, stronger materialistic aspect of the American dream for I think traditional Americans in the sense that I want three-bedroom house, 2-car garage, couple cars, vacations, that kind of thing, right? I think that's true with Asian Americans as well. But if they're not as wealthy, but they have a PhD in anthropology, that would also be a legitimate manifestation of the American dream for them.
But it's interesting because, on one hand, you say the American dream is an opportunity for everybody. But on the other hand, we spoke about these idea of glass ceilings and the difficulties that Asian Americans have kind of, attaining that American dream. So how do you find a level and reconcile those two? It's a tougher question.
It is, because as I said, I don't think it's a glass ceiling because you're Asian American. I think it's a glass ceiling because there are cultural norms that make you successful in the United States, and those cultural norms are not necessarily viewed highly in other cultures, right? The ability to speak up and speak out. That's a. If you're a leader in America, you will speak up. You will let your opinion be known. In Asia culture, that's not necessarily true, right? In Asia, it's more important to be subtle, right, and convincing. In America, it's even more important to be direct and convincing. And it's a glass ceiling in that sense, not in the sense that I think Americans have a aversion to blacks, whites, yellows, or anybody else.
So it's a cultural ceiling rather than
a race ceiling.
We should probably get back to focusing on the personal, since that's
okay. Sorry.
the focus.
After you go for it, do you have any questions?
I was actually wondering, kind of an abrupt shift in topic, but where was your family when Saigon fell?
We were in Saigon. Or, let me rephrase that. My mom and dad were in Saigon. They had not married yet. So, they don't talk about it much, but as I can piece it together, my mom and dad were dating. My dad had a friend who ran the port in Vietnam and had arranged space for him and my mother to leave the country. And so he had to get my mom to the port, but he knew my mom would not leave her family. So he told her that they were going to go get supplies or something like that, and basically tricked her and tried to get her to the port. But the bridge they had to cross, there were 2 tanks on it, so they couldn't cross that bridge. And they didn't make it out when the country fell.
And you mentioned that for a while your grandparents' connections were able to keep your family protected. How did they come to have those connections, or do you know, like what kind of connections?
So my grandfather and my mother's side of the family is from the North Vietnam. So it was clearly a connection between my grandfather, who passed away by then, and somebody in the government then.
And I guess before the fall of Saigon, your family was like, they had friends, they had a bunch of people who they were hanging out with. Did they ever keep in contact with the social sphere that they had in Vietnam after the fall?
Yeah, so remember I said we moved from Seattle to Houston. The reason why we moved to Houston was one of my dad's friends from high school was in Houston. And he said, come live with us for a few months, find a job. So that was how we wound up in Houston. And I think a lot of Vietnamese population centers wind up population centers because of that. Because friends say, "Come join me in the city."
And today, how cultural are your parents? Are they still alive? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So how culturally Vietnamese are they today versus 20 years ago, for example?
More so today than they were before because there's more opportunity, right? When I was growing up in Houston, there wasn't a Vietnamese television station that was available. And I think now if you get satellite, there are 3 or 4. There are more Vietnamese people. There are more Vietnamese grocery stores, more everything, right? So there are more Vietnamese today than they were when I was growing up. Yeah.
Hadn't even occurred to me before. I was also wondering, after the captain grounded the boat on that island when you were in Malaysia for that, where was your family living when you were in?
Yeah, so that island eventually became a refugee camp, and so when we came to the island, it was a jungle, right? When we left, all the trees had been cut because it's like Rapa Nui kind of thing. So many refugees there.
Yeah.
So now it's all grown back, but it eventually became a refugee island, and that's how I went up in America. Is because various countries set up little offices there to process refugee applications. So France was there, the United States was there, various countries in there.
And you said that a church sponsored your family coming to the States. So how did your family have that connection? Like, how did you get in contact with them?
I believe at the time a lot of churches were trying to help Vietnamese refugees' families. There were just programs that did that. My family happened to be Catholic, but I think the churches in the U.S. sponsored a lot of families. I think, or I should say their members sponsored a lot of families.
And how does that process work with the?
I honestly don't know.
Okay.
I'm just extremely grateful that I was there. Yeah.
Do you have any last questions? I've got nothing.
How long was it before your mother and your sister joined you on the island, or did they,
No.
when you were still on the island, or was it?
So they had it worse. They were out at sea for I think 6 weeks, and they eventually ran out of water. So they were using the dew and the mist to drink. And what happened is that there was a typhoon coming, and from what I understand, the laws of the sea say that if there's a typhoon coming and there's an SOS, then you should pick up the people from that boat. And so my mom and my sister were on one of the first boats that was picked up by the U.S. Navy. So it was picked up by. After that was the flood, where the U.S. Navy picked up a whole bunch of boats, but theirs was one of the first. And so they're picked up by the U.S. Navy and wound up in Singapore.
Yay, home.
For quite a long time, yeah, for several months. And after Singapore, they flew straight to Seattle. So for some months, we didn't know where they were, and they didn't know where they were.
That must have been really tough on your dad in that case, and you.
Well, no, I didn't know any better. But my dad and my mom for sure.
So that was more of a roundabout way than how you came to the United States.
Both roundabout, because we were on the Malaysian island for a while and then Seattle. They wound up in Singapore for a while and then Seattle. So, yeah.
And you mentioned that your parents tried to get out several times before they actually succeeded, and you said that they were caught once. And how harshly because I've heard that a lot of people who were caught were killed. So how did they survive?
So the first time my parents tried, not the first time, but the time that my parents were caught and they tried to leave, they relied upon a priest who betrayed them and everybody else on that boat, because there was a boat that was going to go out. And at the time, the rule was whichever province or area houses the prisoners, gets to take whatever they find, right? So we were on this boat that was supposed to leave, at midnight, and it was just it just stayed there for hours. And what they were doing was they were trying to build a prison, so that as soon as the passengers were caught, they could take all the gold and all the money and all that. And so that's how they were arrested. Is that? And then I think the only story I remember from that is because I don't remember anything. The only story I remember is that my dad said that my uncle said something stupid and to one of the police, and he was knocked over the head with a rifle. So.
Anything else?
Is there anything that you would like to mention that we have managed not to ask about? I know we probably haven't touched on
I think that, there are variations on the immigrant story, but they're all essentially the same, which is that something bad was happening at home, because otherwise why would you leave?
Yeah.
And they saw the U.S. as an opportunity, and that view of the world means that a lot of immigrants are successful, and I think I don't think that you should ascribe success or failure to necessarily a culture, because I think it's more granular. I think it's the people who choose to go are willing to take a risk, and the people who choose to go are motivated. And so when you wind up with those people, you wind up with a better group from the word go than not.
Bueno. Thank you so much, Han.
Sure.
It's been a real pleasure, and that's one hell of a story.
Thank you.